Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Let's Talk Politics. I'm your host, Eddie Layne. Um, as usual, we do almost every evening is to examine topical political issues in our country, to talk about development taking place under the People's Progressive Party civic government, and also to respond to the many lies, misinformation, and divisive rhetoric being spread by the opposition. I have with me this evening two distinguished gentlemen, one of them well known to this program, and the other coming on for the very first time, but is very well known among you, the people of this country. The Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh, Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. And of course, the Honorable Joseph Hamilton, the Minister of Labor, and absolutely no stranger to this program. Dr. Singh, Joe, good evening and welcome to the program.
Very good night and good night, Ashni and your viewers.
Thank you very much. Good night, Joe. Good night, Eddie. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and your viewers too.
So I want to get the ball rolling almost immediately, and I want to start with um, the whole issue of the flooding. And I've been saying repeatedly, Dr. Singh, and Joe, you and I had this discussion in one of the programs that we have to put the flooding into context and to establish the fact that as a government, and regardless of who would have been in government, it doesn't matter which party would have been in government at this time, and there was flooding of this nature, then you have to put it into context to recognize first and foremost the flooding is not something that is as a result of the negligence of this government. And I keep saying anybody being negligent to abandon our infrastructure and so forth, and not ensuring that they were in perfect order for seasons like these is really the opposition. But we're not going to go that route. We're not going to blame anybody because they were in government just a few months ago, but we're not going to blame anybody. We're going to deal with this in context to recognize first and foremost that it's a natural phenomenon. It is as a result of the global warming, climate change. We have to first recognize that. We have to also recognize that the intensity of rainfall was extremely high, and that was coupled with what is happening around us. So we have this situation in Brazil, in Manaus, where there is serious flooding. We got flooding happening in Suriname. And I was looking at a video just a few days ago where there is flooding and natural disasters in many, many countries around the world, which clearly shows it is as a result of global warming or maybe natural phenomenon. So that's the first thing we have to put to rest. Secondly, I always say to people that we can't look at the source of the flooding so much and blame anybody. What is important is the manner in which the government of Guyana, the People's Progressive Party civic government, responded to the flooding. And I want to introduce the whole issue of how serious this government has taken the flooding and our responses, our national responses, and the fact that His Excellency has proclaimed this as a national disaster. I'm going to bring you in right in here, Dr. Singh, to first deal with that, and then we're going to deal with some other issues relating to the flooding. But of course, I want, when I bring you in here, to maybe address a little bit our response thus far.
Sure. So thank you very much again, Eddie. And like I said at the start, it's a great pleasure to be here on the program with you and with Joe. First of all, let me say that you're absolutely correct that what we're facing here is a natural disaster of unprecedented proportions. And as you indicated, the president has issued a proclamation declaring what we're currently experiencing as a natural disaster. You made the point, and I think it's an extremely important point, that we need to recognize the reality that what we have here is a combination of circumstances, and in particular, the incidence of high tides, the incidence of extreme rainfall incidents over a sustained period, which has resulted in more accumulation of water on the surface, more accumulation of surface water, including water that is washing down from the highlands into our low-lying coastal plain, overwhelming our coastal drainage systems, which of course can only drain off water when the low tides permit it. So what we've been experiencing over the last 3 weeks or so is a combination of circumstances related to the tide and the weather and exceptional levels of rainfall coming with high levels of intensity, which have, like I said, have combined to create this unprecedented level of flooding. Let me say very clearly, and the president has himself said this even before he declared the disaster. The president has said very clearly, and it has become very, I hope, clear to all concerned, that these are probably the worst floods that we have had in living memory. Your viewers would remember the 2005 floods, and of course those were very severe floods as well. But they would also recall, those who are old enough to remember, that the 2005 floods affected Georgetown and its environs, and some coastal areas, but not the hinterland regions nearly as much as we are witnessing right now. And so while the 2005 floods were very visible because they occurred in the capital city, the reality is that these 2021 floods, the current ongoing floods, are in fact much, much more severe. They're more widespread. They're affecting literally all 10 of the administrative regions. The water has remained at an elevated level for far longer. The level of distress that has been caused to households, to communities, to productive activity has been absolutely devastating. So the first point I want to make is that we're probably dealing with the most devastating incidents of flooding in living memory, quite easily so, in fact. Secondly, and relatedly, you quite rightly note that His Excellency President Irfan Ali has issued a presidential proclamation, declaring what we're currently experiencing as a natural disaster. And what that enables us to do now is it enables our disaster management agencies, including the CDC and other agencies, it allows these agencies to take all of the necessary actions that are needed to protect, in the first instance, to protect lives and to ensure that our citizens are safe, not just from the flooding, but also are safe from illness and disease. You know, there's going to be a very high risk of waterborne diseases, etc., or the risk of high incidence of waterborne diseases. In addition, what this proclamation does is it enables us to escalate our efforts to mobilize resources to respond to the severity of this crisis. And I want to say this, that even in communities where the flood is not being felt directly, or is not being felt so severely directly, I want to call on all Guyanese to pause and reflect for a moment of how difficult the circumstances are that are being faced by our Guyanese brothers and sisters where the flood is being felt most harshly. Thirdly, or fourthly, I want to say that, I've always said it. I said it from the very first day. I said it from the 2nd of August 2020, and I've continued to say it. This government, like all PPP governments, this government is a working government. We're not a government concerned about pomp and ceremony. We're a government concerned about getting work done. And this is evidenced perhaps best by the fact that from the very first days of the flood, President Ali has himself been on the front line of the effort to fight this flood. He's been first and foremost on the front line of gathering a more complete understanding of where is most affected and how severely and what the nature of the damage is and extent of the damages and what the nature of the relief is. He's had his entire cabinet fan out across the country. Right now, their cabinet ministers in communities throughout the length and breadth of the country, gathering a better understanding of what's happening on the ground, providing relief and support to communities and households that are affected. And we've already been delivering, as you know, hundreds of hampers to various communities, indeed thousands of hampers to various communities. These are food hampers. We've already delivered cleaning supplies. We've already relocated people where relocation was needed and practical or practicable. We've deployed emergency equipment, heavy earth moving equipment, and also mobile pumps and additional pumping capabilities to with all of the communities that are affected, with a view to draining the water off of the ground. But this is only the beginning of the effort. And, like I said, the mere presence of President Ali himself on the ground conveys very clearly the seriousness with which our government is taking this matter and the speed with which we're moving to ensure that the discomfort and trauma that the people of our country are currently facing as a result of these floods, that trauma and discomfort are brought to a swift end. So, it's really a very serious situation. I don't want anybody at all to underestimate the gravity of the situation. And like you said earlier, we've also moved to Parliament to mobilize additional resources to help finance the response to the flood.
So we're going to come to that in just a bit, Dr. Singh. But I want to bring Minister Hamilton here because, Minister, you've been on the ground. Matter of fact, the entire cabinet has been on the ground, led by His Excellency. You just mentioned that, Dr. Singh, into communities, meeting with people, listening to their concerns, listening to what they're facing, and see how best you can make decisions on the spot to remedy at least or to bring relief to them. And I keep maintaining that the position of this government has been mainly two things with regards to this flood. One, to preserve lives, and two, to preserve livelihoods. That is the main thrust of what we're doing. We're going to deal, I suspect, Dr. Singh and Minister, with the issues of remedying and rectifying our drainage and irrigation issues. But at this point in time, we have to examine the whole issue of preserving lives and preserving livelihoods. Minister Hamilton, you have been on the ground, moving to communities to assess. And now that the president has taken this even more serious to declare it a natural disaster, your thoughts?
Now, look, Eddie, Dr. Singh spoke to the flooding in many, if not all of the regions. Well, what I would want to focus to begin with is let us reflect on if the PPP civic government did not put in place some mitigating responses, especially in Region 4, what would have happened? In the case of Georgetown, Dr. Singh alluded to, Georgetown is dry because of measures we immediately put in place when we took government March August 2nd. And I recall, Dr. Singh would recall, immediately, I think maybe the second cabinet meeting or thereabout, the Minister of Agriculture brought to cabinet a proposal for $600 million to help to deal with circumstances and the situation that we now face. And therefore, you have today all the major outfalls in Georgetown. They have a mobile pump situated there. And that has been responsible for the fact that Georgetown is dry with all of this that is happening. Second point, and we have had in the last PPP government a lot of criticisms from these know-all types who condemned the action and the money utilized for the Oak Canal irrigation system. Well, let us reflect. East Coast is dry, no major flooding, and that is because there's a Hope Canal. And so I am putting to Guyanese the fact that how proactive the government is and has been. And that is how we have always operated at all times, because our role is to give service to the Guyanese people. That is the major focus of the People's Progressive Party CBA government led by President Irfan Ali, is to give service. I'm sure Minister Singh would have friends, colleagues, family members saying to him, boy, I'm tired, why y'all ain't slowing down? But we are focused on giving service, and therefore there is no way we can slow down, not one of us, in our area of responsibility, because we understand clearly that the Guyanese people must feel comfortable and they must feel regularly that the government is responding to their needs. So I deliberately am focusing on mitigation methods in Georgetown, in Region 4, that in large we were condemned for making those monies available by these know-all types you have in this country. And that is the reason why I continue to make this point, that we cannot and will not be distracted by these people who always are able to condemn, but they have no measure, substitute measure to put on the table as to how you resolve a problem. All they do is condemn that your method is wrong, but they are so backward and so daft that they can put no method on the table to say, not your way, I have a way that I think can work. And so we continue to focus on giving service to the Guyanese people, and that is all the Guyanese people. And you would note that every village, every region, every town, we are there focused and seeking to bring help, bring relief in all different areas to the people of Guyana, and we would continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Minister Hamilton, and it both you and Dr. Singh would have spoken to the seriousness with which the government is examining this issue, and the fact that the emphasis is being placed, and I keep repeating, for the sake of emphasis, the fact that His Excellency has moved in the direction of now making his declaration. It shows how important the government examine this issue, and we understand as a government the challenges that people are facing. And Dr. Singh, this brings me to the point of the issue that you raised, where we recognize and already the situation was declared as a level 2 disaster, which simply means that it's beginning the process of really overwhelming, well, not necessarily overwhelming the local capacity, but opening up the scope for need for regional assistance. So we have moved to another level now, and the fact that we've reached this point, I know, Dr. Singh, you're looking on Monday. You've tabled supplementary financial papers in the National Assembly, and some of those monies are expected to go towards dealing with the flood situation. So I'll give you the chance to maybe explain more in detail to our viewers with regards to what the government has moved to the National Assembly to access. You're muted, I think.
Very good. So thanks a lot, Eddie. You quite rightly indicate that at the last sitting on Thursday, I tabled on behalf of the government financial papers seeking supplementary appropriation, supplementary financing, to support a number of actions, proactive actions, solution-oriented actions that our government will be taking. And if I could just mention a few of these. First of all, we're seeking supplementary allocations of about $10 billion to support the direct flood response. So by that I mean the actions that are necessary, that have been taken and will be taken to respond to the flood. The actions related to draining the water off of the land, pumping the water off of the land, protecting the integrity of the drainage structures, protecting the integrity of our dams, etc. Secondly, relief actions related to delivering relief to households. I mentioned that we've already started deploying support to households, delivering hampers, etc. And this is we're going to have to make sure that households have adequate access to food supplies, cleaning supplies, medical supplies, etc., to keep them safe and well, to keep all of the people of Guyana safe and well and protected from the floods as long as these floods are with us and in the aftermath of the floods as well. Thirdly, it is quite clear now to all, I hope, that productive activity is going to be severely affected. We've already seen the tragic scenes or pictures, for those who haven't been able to see it with their own eyes, the tragic images of farmlands under water for days and in some places weeks. We have seen the really, really tragic and disturbing pictures of livestock who have lost their lives, not being able to get out of the flooded areas quickly enough, or even livestock dying from being unable to access, suffering terrible malnutrition, and then eventually losing their lives as a result of not being able to access dry ground where they can access, where they can have, where they can be able to feed themselves or to be fed. And so there's massive loss of crops, agricultural crops. There's massive loss of livestock, which will inevitably affect productive activity and affect food supply. So there's going to have to be a response to that. Fourthly, we've also seen the extremely shocking images of what has happened to our infrastructure. Every day, I keep getting pictures from different parts of the country showing where dams have been washed away, bridges have been washed away, roads have been washed away, or the run of the water has cut across the road or cut deep valleys across the road or along the roads. And here again, this is literally across almost every region of the country, including hinterland regions and some of the areas that you would assume to ordinarily to be a little bit higher and therefore a little bit safer from floods. And so we've seen dramatic damage to our infrastructure. All of that is going to have to be repaired to return us to some semblance of normalcy. So there is, first of all, this request for $10 billion to address, in the first instance, for the purposes of deploying the immediate response to the flood and providing support in the immediate aftermath of the flood. In addition to that, of course, we have a number of other pressing, urgent needs for which we're seeking additional allocations. These include, first and foremost, the fight against COVID-19. Bear in mind that we're grappling with these floods at a time when COVID-19 is still with us. And so we need additional resources for the purposes of procuring enough vaccines to make sure that all of our adult population can have vaccines. As you know, our policy aim was to get up to 80% vaccination coverage. We're still a long way off from that. In some regions, we are just about or just above 50%. But in other regions, as you know, in some regions, we've I think in region 6, last time, I think a day or two, we were above 50 or 51%. But there are other regions where we're still lagging behind. And I've spoken about this publicly too. There are regions like Region 8 and Region 10, where despite the tremendous effort of our public health system, and despite the tremendous effort of the political leadership, because I myself participated in a cabinet outreach to Region 10 to promote vaccination, and we're still struggling to get the level of vaccination up there. We want to make sure an adequate supply of vaccines for the entire country. So we're seeking additional financial resources to do that. Thirdly, as you know, we also have a very ambitious program in housing and water. So we're seeking additional resources to continue to accelerate the housing program and access to potable water. And then there are other allocations in areas such as the security sector, etc., to make sure that we continue to be able to fight crime as effectively as possible. So this financial paper addresses, the two financial papers that we've tabled address all of these various additional requirements that have emerged since the enactment of the budget, but foremost amongst the additional allocations that we're seeking is the $10 billion amount to fight the floods. And if I may, Eddie, just to pick up on the point that Joe made, and it's an extremely important point. We are a proactive government, and we're a government about seeking solutions. We're not a government about negativity and about complaining. We're a government about delivering solutions for people. Quite in contrast with the APNU AFC, which history has demonstrated to us is a party more concerned about obstructing development rather than supporting development. And so I make that
And
point
I'm happy.
I make that point really to say, Eddie, that Monday will be a test, because on Monday the vote on these financial allocations will be a test to see who's interested in delivering solutions and who's interested in obstructing solutions.
And I'm happy that you made that point, Dr. Singh, and I'm going to bring in Joe here too, because what I recognize is already they are trying to throw spanners into the works. So they have this thing that they're circulating on social media, where they're saying, I think they're saying $100,000 per household affected by the flood. This is a red herring. This is somehow an attempt to somehow think they can put the government on the back foot, to say that, okay, they're going to raise that as an issue in the National Assembly to see the response. And it is not strange, it is not surprising that it's coming from that kind of ludicrous. I mean, as a government, we would be willing to give people as much we can to bring them back to some level of normalcy, but you have to be realistic. I think the intention there is to really try to somehow put the government to say, I'm putting you in the spot that I'm saying to you, we're advocating, and this is the reality of them. We're advocating for monies for the people without considering uh, the scenario, the situation in which you're operating. So I wanted to make that point, that already I'm seeing they're trying to lay the groundwork to create some sort of doubt, some sort of confusion over the request. The reality is that as a government, the People's Progressive Party Civic, and I don't even need to go back toward 23 years. I can use from August 2nd what we demonstrated thus far. We had a more aggressive program, and I know both of you, Joe, Dr. Singh, would agree. We had a more aggressive program responding to the pandemic in the opposition than APNU as the government, because we were in the streets, His Excellency, then President elect, distributing masks, ensuring that he was able to secure PPEs, etc., for frontline workers. We were on the ground working even before assuming office. His Excellency, upon assuming office, do a complete makeover rather, of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I saw stories, Joe, you might recall, Minister might recall, about them had some plan to give people 100,000. They seem to be in love with this $100,000 per household. They had some plan to give people $100,000 per household for COVID, when we gave 25. But we have never seen that plan materialize, and I suspect we're not seeing any evidence of documents of that plan. But I said all of that to make the point that already I'm seeing that, and you're right, they're going to be put to the test on Monday to say our people are suffering, the people of this country are suffering, and we need to provide the resources to ensure, one, we secure their livelihoods, and that is why I made mention of livelihoods and lives earlier, and two, to ensure that we protect them and that they're comfortable at least during this difficult period. Joe, you know the PNC inside out more than any one of us, myself or Dr. Singh, and you know that they have something up their sleeves that they will want to throw into the works on Monday.
Look. The thing is, Eddie and Dr. Singh and viewers. Look, what we're dealing with here is a set of obnoxious people that have no credibility. So let us start there from the first point. And Dr. Singh will tell you, last Thursday, you had stark evidence again of how obnoxious these people are. One, Dr. Anthony is reporting to the National Assembly and the nation about the COVID-19 response and what has happened. And these dullards, as I call them, they were in glee and making fun at the fact that over 400 citizens, brothers and sisters, people's family, husbands, wives, children lost their lives. I mean, it was a gleeful moment for these morons. Second point, again, the Prime Minister is reporting on the flooding and its effects on people's lives and their livelihood. And then again, these morons having a gleeful time. It's like fun for them and party when you have tens of thousands of people affected by this flooding. Even people who are their supporters, people who voted for these Lincoln poops. And it was fun. They're making fun of this matter. Thirdly, the Attorney General is presenting to the National Assembly and to the nation things that the government will do to right the wrong done to Walter Rodney and his family. And you had again these asinine people again making fun of the demise of Walter Rodney and the travails his family had to go through over 30 years. So I'm painting that so that the Guyanese people in Guyana and out of Guyana and all the world could have a view and an understanding that these people are not even worthy to be in the National Assembly, more so to be in a government running in this country. Look, I have spent 23 years in the National Assembly, and I keep making the point. When they were in government, they were the worst government ever. Now they're in opposition, they are the worst opposition ever. And so what is important and noteworthy is the Guyanese people are not fooled, even their supporters. They have seen through them. They know who they are. The only set of people who believe their fallacy is themselves and those who are like-minded. And that is important for us in government, that the majority of the Guyanese people, they recognize two important things. One, that these people in the opposition, beginning with the opposition leader and all of them, are useless. Ramjatan and all the cabal are useless people. And secondly, they have a government that are working every day to ensure that we give service, goods and service to them. Those two things, they could say how much they want. They could try to fabricate how much they want and lie how much they want. It will not change the reality and what the Guyanese people know for a fact. And fourthly, you have this guy that I call the pathological liar and pretentious crook, Patterson. Imagine he stands in the National Assembly and presenting himself as virtuous. I mean, it want to make you vomit that a human being can be so warped to think that he can, at this moment, influence the Guyanese people somehow and seek to cause embarrassment to the people's civic government. When this guy has shown that he's just a petty larcenist, a man who is a larcenist by taking bangles and bed sheets and pillowcases and all that from the government coffers. I mean, sometimes you look at these people and it amazes you that a person's mind can be so devious and so deficient and devilish, I would say, that they believe that after all the evidence presented to the Guyanese people of their deeds, they can come to the Guyanese people and try to present how virtuous and how holy they are. I mean, it is mind-boggling. And therefore, Eddie, with all of that, we have to keep focus. The government's role is to give goods and service to the Guyanese people wherever they are. And when they're affected, we have to respond. And that is what we're doing and we'll continue to do.
I'm happy. I'm happy you went down that road, Joe, because I want to raise another issue. And you're right that look, we have an opposition that somehow believes that they took the word opposition literally. They took that word literally. So even if you go and you say, look, we want to transform the lives of 100,000 citizens by doing this, then Harman, Sherrod, and gang will jump up and say no. They will say no. You know why? Because they take it literally. And we saw an example in the National Assembly on Thursday with that ill-conceived, misplaced, poorly put together motion by Patterson. My personal view is Patterson have bigger things to focus on. He has to focus on his 3Bs program, beds, bangles, and bed sheets, and how he will deal with those. But you made the point in your presentation, Dr. Singh, that one should not take lightly the manner in which the opposition is operating, because it is a well orchestrated, not necessarily executed, attempt to stymie development of this country, to stymie progress. And I think it's plain and simple because when you look at a government coming in and after 10 months they have outdone you, they've done more than what you did for 5 years. I think that fact is kicking in, and you find them trying to oppose everything. And we saw the motion on the land policy and the anti-development stance the opposition has adopted, and I'm happy that you brought it to the fore, Dr. Singh, and I'll give you an opportunity here to maybe expound some more, so to let the people of this country know that the opposition that you're dealing with, and Joe made the point earlier, they failed as a government, and oh boy, they're failing miserably as an opposition. Dr. Singh, I'll give way to you.
Sure. Let me say very clearly, to add to what Joe just said. Let me say very clearly that the APNU AFC has no moral authority to speak on any matter of national importance or of significance. They have no moral authority, and Joe has dealt with this at length. But I want to give a couple of examples. So you mentioned Mr. Patterson, and you mentioned the thing about the bangles and bracelets and so on. Let us not forget that this is a person sitting in the National Assembly who, when confronted with the question about whether he had been given gifts of gold jewelry bought with public funds, his response was that he does not wear jewelry. His immediate response was he doesn't wear jewelry, and this is on public record. It's been reported widely and recorded publicly. When asked whether he received gifts of gold jewelry bought with public funds, you know what was his response? That he doesn't wear jewelry. Look, he doesn't even have on a ring. Eddie and Joe, you would recall, it didn't take 15 minutes for dozens of photographs to surface in the public domain of him wearing not only jewelry, but multiple different bracelets. When it literally took not even 15 minutes for dozens of photographs to start. How can a person not know whether they wear jewelry? How can a person not know whether you're speaking about barefaced dishonesty. You're speaking about people who will look at the people of Guyana and say, I don't wear jewelry, when in fact they have been extensively photographed for years wearing all manner of bracelets, many of which were probably bought with public money. So they have the APN, we had the case of the $18 million signing bonus, where the then Minister of Finance said that He doesn't know anything about a signing bonus, that one was neither requested nor received. When in fact his own ministry had already written a letter asking for a special bank account to be opened to hold to hold the signing bonus that was received. So you're dealing first of all with a party, the APNU AFC. Like I have said it, they're all as far as I'm concerned, they're all what I described previously as the same old PNC. You're dealing with the APNU AFC, which is a political entity, the dwindling political entity, which has absolutely no moral authority. None of its members have the moral authority to speak on any matter of any significance or national importance. That's the first point I want to make. And there are multiple examples. I mean, these are people who watched you in your faces and said 33 is not greater than 32. These are people who watched you in your faces and said, we won the election, but we're not showing you our SOPs. SOPs are public documents. They're posted on the wall of the place of poll. But they will hold out. They won the election. But by the way, their SOPs are a secret, not to be disclosed. So they have, let's understand clearly that they have no moral authority to speak on any matter whatsoever. That's the first point I want to make. Secondly, if we examine the history of the APNU's behavior, both in government and in opposition, they have a long track record of making outlandish and false promises that they have no intention of keeping, both in opposition and in government. We just have to go back to the immediate pre-2015 period, to the vast range of promises that they made, whether it is the 20 or 40% increase that they were going to give to sugar workers. You remember the $9,000 a bag they were going to give for paddy. You remember the drastic cuts that they were going to make to taxes. Instead, as soon as they got into government, they did exactly the opposite. Instead of giving the sugar workers the 20 or 40% or whatever it was that they had promised them, they closed down the sugar industry. The $9,000 a bag for paddy has still not materialized. They spent 5 years in government and it still has not materialized. The cuts in taxes were replaced. Instead of delivering on what they promised, the cuts in taxes, they introduced 200 new taxes and collected hundreds of billions of dollars of additional taxes over the 5-year period that they were in government. So the practice of making ridiculous, outlandish, false, and dishonest promises is not a one-off instance with the APNU AFC. It is a consistent and frequent and regular practice. It's the norm for them. They just make things up, make all sorts of random promises, believing that the people of Guyana are foolish and that they will be deceived by these false promises. But the people of Guyana demonstrated very clearly that they are far more sophisticated and far more intelligent than the APNU AFC might believe. Thirdly, I want to make this point that the APNU AFC has absolutely no interest in promoting development. In fact, their agenda has always been to obstruct and to derail development. And I can give you many examples of this. You would recall prior to 2015, between 2011 to 2015, the efforts that they made to derail several major transformative development projects. Take the Amila Falls hydropower project. We had major international investors, some of the largest and most credible international institutional investors, lined up to build the Amila Falls hydropower project. They took action, including action using their one-seat majority in the parliament at the time to deliberately kill that project. Had they not done so, Amila would have been delivering electricity right now. Electricity would have been dramatically more reliable to all of the people of Guyana, and the cost would have been significantly lower, which would have led to more jobs, more incomes for people. They, knowing that this was a good project for Guyana, stepped in and frustrated and derailed the project. And that's just one example. There are multiple other examples. The motion yesterday, the motion on Thursday was another example. They know fully well that the development of Guyana's shore-based capabilities and the development of Guyana's onshore capabilities for serving the oil and gas sector has one main result, and that is the creation of jobs for Guyanese people. You know what their motion was seeking to do? To put those developments on hold. You can translate that to mean to put jobs for the Guyanese people on hold. That's basically what they were seeking to do, to say, hold on. Don't let this development happen as yet. Hold on. Let's hit pause on the creation of jobs and the generation of incomes for Guyanese people. And there are many, many other examples of projects and initiatives that I can give that they, in fact, have always demonstrated and displayed an agenda to frustrate and to derail development rather than an agenda to promote promote development, and indeed by extension to promote the well-being of people. And I want to make one final point. The APNU AFC is also a party that engages in an extremely perverse political practice. And that is that they are prepared to sacrifice the interests of the people of Guyana in pursuit of their narrow political interest. They are prepared to have Guyanese people, working Guyanese people, denied jobs just so that they can score what they believe are cheap political points. Joe gave the examples just now about their reaction, almost as if they're happy that people are dying from COVID because it's in their heads it's happening under the PPP, so this is something they celebrate. Nobody in Guyana should celebrate or even find it acceptable that a single death by COVID has occurred. And every person in Guyana should be deeply concerned, traumatized, and alarmed at every single death, and should commit themselves to fighting those deaths, not sitting down there gleefully and saying, when bad news comes, it's a good thing if bad news comes because it's coming under the PPP. You can't claim to be concerned about the Guyanese people and to be celebrating bad news because it happens under a PPP government. What responsible political party behaves like that? What responsible political leader behaves like that? And I want to give one final example in this regard. The leadership of the APNU AFC quite eagerly took their vaccines very early in the vaccination campaigns. Very early, we saw them all. At the first available opportunity, they all went and took their vaccines. But they refused to come out and encourage anybody else to take their vaccines because they were prepared to see, they were happy to see slow take-up of the vaccines, which you can translate that to mean that they were happy to have people be jeopardized by not taking up the vaccines and run the risk of contracting COVID-19 just because they feel that every additional case that happens under the PPP, they feel happy about it. How can you, as a responsible political leader, go and take your COVID vaccine yourself and refuse to encourage the people of your country to take your COVID vaccine? And they only started to crawl out of the woodwork and start to call on people to take their vaccines when the vice president called them out on it and spoke publicly about the fact. Many of your viewers would recall when the vice president spoke publicly about the fact that the leadership of the APNU AFC quietly took their vaccines, but have been studiously refusing to encourage the people of Guyana to take their vaccines. Only when they were called out by the vice president, then they started to crawl out of the woodwork and started to make some noises, trying to pretend to encourage people to take their vaccines. What responsible political leadership behaves like this?
What is interesting, and you made the point, when you look at the APNU AFC now, again, one would recall prior to 2015, APNU had the answers to everything. They spoke about having the answers to crime. They had this lavish plan, and they had all the experts, including Granger and the others. They had an answer to every single thing in this country. They had 5 years. And this is, let's take, for example, their land use policy that they are talking about now, that Patterson took that bill to Parliament. They had 5 years. The oil and gas sector, while it started under the PPP, the first oil find was made public under them days after the elections. And they had 5 years of devising a policy. They knew that you had to get shore base. Why? The question is why Patterson and his gang didn't decide to move to the National Assembly or to move to anywhere else to put a land use policy in place to ensure that the shore bases and every other investment comply with those policies. So again, you're seeing that they have the answers for everything. Before the 2015 elections, they had the answers. They had 5 years. They did absolutely nothing. They did the opposite, as you rightly said, to what they promised. Now they're back out of power, and again, you're seeing them. They're crawling out to say they have the answers again. So Patterson, all of a sudden, after 5 years, he had an amnesia. He had a brain blank. In 5 years, he didn't know that there was a need for a land use policy. But now, 10 months, 12 months after they were removed from office, they automatically knows there is a need. So we're seeing the same people, the same things reoccurring. And you talked about his denial of wearing gold jewelry and all sorts of things. Well, Joe, in his closing, I'm giving Joe a chance to wrap things up. But Joe, in his closing comments, will tell you why he consistently and continuously referred to David Patterson as the pathological liar. So, Joe, I'm going to give you a chance to close the program.
Quickly, Eddie, Dr. Singh in his presentation made a point that they're so backward and daft that the guys, they don't know the difference between land use policy and zoning. What? They weren't sure what they want, and that's important to note. But as I have said when I began, Eddie, look, the Guyanese people are well aware of who cares for them and who is helping to change their lives, and who, as Dr. Singh says, is seeking to be obstructionist to ensure that they are not given goods and service. Our position is that we have been elected by the Guyanese people to govern, and govern we will. The APNO AFC, the PNC, or whichever incarnation, they don't have the capacity to stop us from giving service and governing. And I think that is what is creating the problem, why they're getting so desperate daily, because they believe that somehow they would have been able to create enough aura and terror to help to stymie development, but they have not been successful in 10 months. And we will just continue to persevere and continue to give service to the Guyanese people.
Thank you very much, Minister Hamilton. Dr. Ashni Singh, Minister Hamilton, it was a pleasure to have you guys this evening. I mean, the time was too short. The time went by so fast. We had many other things to discuss, including that statement delivered by the Attorney General in the National Assembly with regards to Dr. Walter Rodney. And again, the PNC is uneasy because this is bringing to the fore the role of the PNC in the assassination of Dr. Rodney. So that's an issue that maybe we'll have to discuss at another point. The time has gone for us. But gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have you this evening, to have some discussions, to educate.
Thank you very much, Ashni. Have a good night.
So have a good
Thanks
rest
a
of
lot,
the evening,
Joe.
gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, Eddie. Thanks a lot, Joe. Good night to you all.